Hello and welcome to MOPO on the Beach, take 2. So this week we'll be talking about Tribe on Homecoming and Belonging by Sebastian Junger. Quite a short book compared to last week's, but
hence why we're back a week later.
yeah, a book a week. That's the dream, isn't it?
A week. We just wanted to come talk to you guys so bad.
Yeah.
Our egos got a massive boost after the 16 likes we got on Facebook. So it's like, we need more.
Yeah, I mean it was 138 pages altogether, so not very long at all.
Our initial plan for a book a month, but yeah, we got the book and we realized that online it says it's 170 pages, but then you realize there's like 50 pages of bibliography and the words are like massive. It's like for children. So we smash it out in a week and we bring you, I think, quite an interesting one this week. I have a lot to say about it. As you can see from my folds, my page folds, I've just got like every other page folded. No, Mo has his obscure quotes in there.
Not all quotes this time.
Oh, so tidy with your fold. They're all like this, like fairly uniform size, perfect right angles, or 45-degree angles rather. Mine are just
what is that? You're ruining the book.
Mate, it's about natural, okay? It's all about the natural, and I've got some down here as well. Alright, anyways, so basically what the book talks about is, it has a focus on PTSD. So Sebastian Junger is a war journalist, and he spent a lot of years in war zones, and he's come back and he has experienced PTSD himself, and he is very interested in the way that, in the psychology that soldiers experience after they return from war. And I guess what his mission was to try and improve that situation. And what are you doing, Mo?
No, just...
Okay. You're distracting me. Anyways, so he talks about what it means to be a person, what it means to be a person in society, what it means to have identity, meaning in life, and he looks at this through the lens of soldier culture, tribal culture, and he takes those two things and he puts them in contrast with modern Western life. And it's a very interesting insight into like the way different people experience the world. And I think I gained a lot from this book, I would say.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. It was really interesting. Just the kind of the comparison, and like there's almost this kind of paradox of the comfort that we have in modern society. Like, you know, we don't have to go out and fight for our food. We don't have to go, like, a lot of us don't go out and fight in wars. A lot of us aren't even put in high stress situations. And by high stress, I mean high stress in the sense that there's a danger to your life. You know, we're put in high stress all the time in other things, but like high stress in your life, or you having to rise to potentially save somebody else, or to think about more than yourself. You know, we put in so much comfort, but then at the same time, you know, from tribal culture or from previous civilizations, we're missing out on that, you know, community feeling. And it's really interesting, because it's like we're getting all these comforts, but then, you know, what are we losing because of that?
Yeah, it's like if you need to rely on the people around you to survive, to eat, to fend away animals, then you are gonna have a really tight bond with these people. But if you take that thing out, if you take that element out, and you have medicine, you have Sainsbury's, and you have a Deliveroo, like just literally on call at any moment, then you lose the need to have a deep connection with the people around you, which in turn leads to kind of alienation, as well as just like, I guess, not really caring for the people around you, which I think Sebastian Junger argues to be a very key point in our happiness and our sense of identity and fulfillment. Yeah, I think the really interesting thing that he talks about, or the argument, is that, you know, we've evolved for our entire human history to be living in tribes. to be living in these tight communal situations. So we would have evolved to benefit that system, you know. So our descendants, no, our forefathers, whatever, they would have evolved like characteristics that would have benefited them in a way that kept social cohesion together.
Well, I mean, he kind of argues, and I think it's not just him, but it's kind of probably some researchers who theorize about PTSD being a natural, or sort of, like a natural reaction to being put in a high stress situation. It's it's essentially your survival instinct kicking in outside of a direct threat to your life. So you've gone to war, you've been in situations where you're genuinely, or some of them not actually genuinely under threat, but you're some of them are in a threat. And then when they get back, it might be a crowded tube station, it might be a supermarket that's packed or whatever, and all of a sudden your body, because it doesn't understand that situation, because it's unable to quantify the threats around you, it starts to think, I'm in a high stress situation, I need to get out of here. So it's really interesting that's
Yeah, like another thing that he mentioned that I found was really interesting was that they say when you have PTSD, not only do you avoid you'll get out of certain situations, you'll also avoid going out. So you'll tend to want to stay in more and be more
secluded,
which
is like
an introvert. Yeah,
which is basically like
it's like, it's dangerous out there, I'm gonna stay in. So those who actually had PTSD maybe would have benefited in a Darwinian sense.
Yeah, but then in modern society now, the issue is like that depression is it's like a reinforcing loop. If you've got PTSD, you don't want to go in high stress situations, and then you get depression and you want to stay inside because you don't want to go out. But then that's like you're not reintegrating back into society. You're keeping the people who might care for you away, and you're just isolating yourself. And from a survival point of view, like you said, that's good. But from trying to integrate it back into society, you're making it work. Like but actually the actual PTSD, the loop is actually making it worse. You don't want to see people.
Like there was that really interesting point in here in the book where they were talking about, I think it was in India or Nepal, where they were talking about the children from the two different caste systems. So there are, I could find it, but in short there are two or more different caste systems. The upper classes, so the more highly socially valuable, their culture is much more Western in that there's less kind of sharing. It's more about, what was it again, man? It was like,
keep going.
Basically, there's less of a it's community sense, and you kind of
Are you talking about the one where one of them is like strictly Christian?
No, it wasn't that. One sec. Let me find it. Mate. I might have it folded, I believe.
Maybe this is why we should get a Kindle.
No, mate.
Kindle plug? No.
We are sponsored by Kindle. As soon as they pay us. Here we go. Child soldiers of either sex who went back to the stratified villages could remain traumatized almost indefinitely. Okay, so no, here's the point. So it was in southern Nepal, and with a civil war rumbling for years, and there were two kinds of villages in that area. One was exclusively Hindu and have less sharp class distinctions, and then there were mixed Hindu and Buddhist ones that are far more open and cohesive. Basically, the soldiers who went, children that I can't speak today. The child soldiers that went back to the less stratified villages, i.e. the ones that are more communal had basically virtually no PTSD, whereas the children that went back to the stratified villages had quite severe PTSD.
Yeah. Yeah, that is
So he argues it's all about re-entering into society.
he argues as well that there's a strand that he follows for quite a bit of the book, and it's about, you know, PTSD after war or after anything traumatic is normal, but it's if it lasts a few years or longer, that's when it's not normal. That's to do with society, either society failing you or you failing to reintegrate, but potentially because of society. So one of the kind of train of thoughts he follows is the inability to re-enter. But then he says, after he's spoken about that, which we can come on to, there is that, he says that people who are in a really long-term PTSD, often it's because when they left, they were almost running away from something, you know. So it was like even before they went to war, maybe their idea of society and of community was warped. They might have been running away, like, you know. I think the US Army has a really high number of recruiting from, you know, people who have suffered sexual abuse or just, you know,
it's like very, very
abuse at their family.
Disproportionate.
Yeah. So then it's those people, when they come back, you know, they've gone from having, you know, being in a society that they were basically running away from to a tribal culture with their unit that, you know, so cohesive, so seeing those people every day, sleeping in the 10-man or you know, dorms, and then coming back and then basically there being nothing, you know. So, and then all of a sudden there is zero support system for them. They've just been through so, you know, maybe potentially some of the most formative years of their life, if it's a young, you know, kid who joined the army at 18 or whatever, and also traumatic, and now they're in a space, in a place where, you know, they don't know who to go to, they don't know who to talk to.
They come back and there's so little of a warrior culture, which kind of almost segues into tribal stuff. But one thing that they mention that is really bad for soldiers is if you treat veterans as victims. Apparently that's like the worst thing you can do, because the last thing they want is to be coddled and to feel like, oh, I'm this weak thing that has experienced the negative thing, I need to be taken care of. That's the opposite of what they need. What they need is to, you know, vocalize what they've done and accept what they've done, and have the people around understand what they've really been through, and be like, you're still a man or a woman or whatever gender you are, and then you face it full on and strong, as opposed to being this kind of weakened person.
Yeah, I mean, I found that I actually highlighted that point as well, and I found it interesting that it was like international aid workers in Liberia who introduced that idea of victimhood to past, you know, soldiers and warriors. So it's like, you know, so basically in Liberia, was it the war between, was it a civil war in Liberia?
I forget.
So there were, you know, soldiers who had potentially committed, you know, really bad, like acts of like really bad violence, right? And then all of a sudden you've got these international aid workers who are coming in with the food and with the welfare, and they're saying, you know, if you just accept that you were a victim of this, then, you know, we can give you this food, we can give you this money, you know, and you can go about and reintegrate yourself into society. And what they didn't realize is actually these people, because they had, you know, partaken in such violent acts, they had this guilt over them, lingering over them. But if you you know, you come back in to society, and if something is, you know, being dangled in front of you like a prize, and all you have to do is say, I am, or I am this, then a lot of these people are going to do it, and then they'll live with that guilt, and the burden is, it's not the overall burden is both on, it's not going to be on the aid workers, it's going to be on the society and on the people who actually, you know, have to live with that guilt and aren't able to integrate themselves in society because they're the victims now. So I thought that was
I think one thing that the tribe, that the Native Americans used to do to reintegrate soldiers into their back home was really interesting. Did you read about the sun dance?
yeah.
That was crazy. I did some research on that. Basically, the sun dance is when soldiers come back, they've been through a traumatic experience, they do a ceremony, and the entire village comes out and watches, or at least joins in on some degree, at least being there and experiencing it with them. But the soldiers, they will all go into a tent, a big tent with a big post in the middle, a big post, and then they have 2 ropes tied to the top of the post, with the 2 ropes coming down to each person. Each person has 2 ropes. And then what they do is they pierce their chest with this wooden stick that goes across their, like, under the skin, almost like halfway between the nipples, kind of, across that space. And then the strings are attached up, and they walk around, and they do that for hours. Hours later,
they dance, basically trying to free themselves of the trauma, and until the poles are released.
Yeah, until the poles
they come
fall out. They actually fall out of the
But
skin.
is it drilled into, like, what is drilled into what?
I saw some pictures, and basically, like, so the scars are like that big on either side. They're like this. So it's like the size of a biggish orange. If you're holding, like, what, a medium-sized orange in your hand, like that kind of diameter.
I think we've got to clarify and call it either a satsuma or a mandarin.
Okay.
Because an orange.
You make that call. Okay. You make that call, man.
Wait, are you saying there or like?
No, as in like, so if you're holding an orange,
okay, all right.
Like this, you know what I mean?
Medium-sized orange, let's say.
Medium-sized orange, like that, and then they pierce through. It's crazy like that. I'll show you.
That is.
I'll actually show you. I have it here actually. Where'd my mouse go? Images. Yeah, you see like this. It's like, what the fuck?
That is big.
Yeah, anyway, but the point is, like, the entire village comes out and, like, shares the pain with them, which I thought was really fascinating.
Yeah, that was another thing, wasn't it? It was that the kind of the proximity of the war in relation to where the people are. Like they mentioned, you know, some of the, was it the Indians, like Native Americans, some of their wars used to just be like literally on their doorstep. So you know you would go. So there's 2 parts to it. It's like the
Native
Americans, yeah.
Indians, yeah.
So they would you know, the warriors would go out, and it would literally be like you're protecting your home, like you know, and people can see that. So obviously, like, firstly, you know what you're fighting for. You're like, you know, they're not going to go and take my children or take my women or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And destroy our home. So you're like fighting for that, and then when you're finished, you come back. It's, you know, people, because it's so close, they feel they're sharing the experience of war with you, because they're like, oh, okay, you know, our people are out there fighting and trying to protect us. You come back, and then what was the other part of it? And the other part is then that you come back and you're needed in society.
Yeah.
They're like, okay, great, you were fighting, like, we fought off those people, we need some food now, like, go and catch food.
Yeah.
Which is like, that sounds kind of alien, but it's good, because it's like you're still needed. You're not just like, oh, just you're, you know, just rest for a few months or a few years,
just,
you know.
be sad in the corner, it's fine.
It's like,
you know,
that was one of the things he argues, that the thing that, you know, a lot of American vets need are jobs. Are that feeling of actually being needed by society, not like, here is your kind of, you know, allowance.
Yeah, your benefits.
Here's
your
just
discount at Walmart or whatever.
Yeah, he does actually say that.
Yeah.
So
But
yeah.
I think one thing that I really took away from this book, I took away many things, but one thing that I really stood out to me is the fact that so many of the invading European people volunteered to go join the Indians.
Oh yeah,
I
yeah.
found
We haven't even mentioned that.
Yeah,
That's like first half of the book.
That's like the most amazing thing. So when basically, long story short, when the Europeans invaded America and they were basically having a war with the Native Americans, it took quite a long time. And obviously, you have prisoners of war, and people would get captured and end up living in either side. On many occasions, people, so the whites, they would volunteer to go back after being released, go back and live with the Indians.
Not just volunteer. They would sometimes run.
Yeah.
And risk the possibility of persecution.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
didn't it become treason at some point?
Yeah, at one point, yeah.
So
After
like,
a while. Apparently, like, so yeah.
yeah, no, that's fine.
No, apparently, I forgot what I was going to say. There were, yeah, so after some years, once families started moving over from England, apparently like the young women or the young people would be very interested in the tribal culture, and then they would mingle, and the fathers or the senior people got really pissed off and would not allow that to happen.
There was a really funny story from that. It's like, I wouldn't be able to find it fast, but it's like they were talking about, when it became, like you said, when it became almost like people started getting really interested and curious about it, you'd get like fathers dressing as Native Americans and then like going to like church and stuff, and like the pastors just being like, you can't come like this.
No, I think it's because certain people actually genuinely like the culture and they felt very connected to it. So they would be in their European white towns wearing Native American stuff. It's basically like being a punk rocker back in the day. Like fuck these people, and you dress in the Native American garb. But there was not one reported case of a Native American actively choosing to go live in white culture, which is really fascinating. But that's what makes me so curious about it, because obviously their lives are harder. Obviously they have to like struggle every day, and they don't have medicine, they don't have like feathers in their pillow and nice duvet and stuff like that. But what makes it a so much more satisfying lifestyle? So I find that really fascinating. And what is it about it that is so attractive? I think Winston no, not Churchill. Who was it? The American Churchill, essentially. No.
Oh, I know who you're talking about.
George Washington? George Washington. Yeah.
Was it?
Yeah. It was George Washington. He wrote a segment. I'm pretty sure it was Washington. Anyway, he wrote a segment about that phenomenon. He was saying it's quite common for once white people, at the time everyone was white, once the white people got a taste of Indian culture, they wouldn't want to leave. They want to carry on there. And he also made the comment that this highlights that potentially in Western society we have something very wrong. Or maybe due to the nature of how we've set up our society, we've kind of missed over a really important thing that humans need.
Yeah, no, I remember reading that. I think it was quite an apt point. I think he said it was like, I don't want to paraphrase, but I think it was something along the lines of like, maybe we have, on a very basic level, kind of, got something very wrong about the way that modern society is.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's like there's less variance. It's not like, modern society, we have loads of people who live at the bottom, loads of people who live in the middle, and then loads, like, the very few who live right at the very top. you know, with crazy amounts of wealth. Whereas in a sort of more classic tribal culture, you've got everyone coming together and sharing the burden between each other.
Everything. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The burden, you share all your resources. He does make one point though, saying that back in the day, or back in like in that lifestyle, you can't really accumulate that much wealth because tribes do move around. So even if you did have loads of stuff, loads of bracelets and gold and
Fur skins,
all this stuff
peeled off of like
animals.
Yeah,
you wouldn't be able to carry that stuff. So you have to live quite minimally. They also said if a certain male started to try and dominate the other people and try and take too many resources for himself, the other senior males would step in and like sort him out.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Which I found really interesting, which I think is good. It's something that needs to happen. Like imagine if imagine if we went to like a Canary Wharf, started beating up beggars. No.
That'd be good.
Another really interesting point I found was how it's almost quite easy to interpret what we're saying here as very left wing. It's like share everything, everybody is equal, share everything. You know what I mean? But then, you know,
yeah, I know where you're going with this. Yeah. But as in, he did have like it wasn't just in the end. Like I got the sense every time it started talking about, you know, benefits and he very much saw them as like not in all cases but abused by the system.
Well,
like,
yeah,
and just seeing them as handouts.
well, yeah, that's another point, but and that's a slightly more specific point, but the fact is like you can see it to be very left wing, however it's also extremely right wing in the sense that if anybody is not right wing but one feature of it, if anybody becomes a freeloader, they are heavily persecuted.
Yeah.
So you can't freeload. You have to put in the work. You have to put in the effort. If you need help, if you are in a genuinely a disadvantaged position, then you definitely will get that help.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like it might be easier though. Like, okay, in a tribal culture, you got a lazy guy who sits around, you know, and doesn't do much. You're like, you haven't caught enough food this week, like get up. And he's not just going to be like, oh, I can't walk, because they would literally like, you know, make him stand up, beat him until he like, you know, walks. Or I feel like the role that he's doing in that society, it's easy enough to figure out whether or not he can do it. Like either he's actually unable to function in that role as a hunter or whatever, and so he wouldn't be able to do it. But then if he can but he's lazy, they will make him do it. Whereas here, like, because it's more, I don't know, maybe it feels like it's more complicated. Like, you know, if somebody says they've got like a specific illness, like it's harder to then disprove that they do, or to disprove that they actually can't work, you know? Yeah, well, I mean, and it's not just like but you need to hunt, you know? No, of course. But I mean, I think it's just the principle. It's very, I mean, you can't apply the exact same logic once it's been scaled up so much. We're talking about like 50 people compared to like 5 million in London, you know, that's a complete different scale. And obviously they're not directly, what's the word? Directly relatable. However, I think the principles are interesting to examine. Well, I mean, it's because the tribes are lean, isn't it? Like, you know, like you said, they move around, and they're trying to survive. I feel like maybe that's like, maybe we think in modern society now we're trying to thrive, okay? But actually, there are some of us who are barely surviving, right? We have people who live on the streets in London. Would you call? Like, I'm an engineer and I don't get enough money. But it's okay because you do a podcast which makes you tons of money, right?
We're sponsored by Kindle.
Shout out to Kindle. I've been trying to get Paul to get one for a while. I want one as well. Just gonna throw a little plug in there.
We will we'll do a nude calendar.
In no way is that true. Yeah, so I was saying something about lean society. Yeah.
So they're much smaller.
Yeah, so it's like you can't have somebody who might be able to feed like a massive part of your community just chilling and just being like, no, I'm just gonna eat your food. Like, Paul, just go and hunt for me. Like, I can't bother to hunt, you know.
Yeah, like I made your tea earlier. You lazy piece of shit.
So, yeah.
I think the most I got out of this book was thinking, okay, it seems evident that in tribal communities and tight communities where you're really dependent on each other and your survival is dependent on each other and all these kind of things, we feel good. We feel connected and we feel a community spirit and we have more identity. So what I'm most interested in, I guess, doing next is thinking about how we can incorporate tribal sort of lifestyles into the modern day behemoth cities.
Step one, Sundance.
We need to do a Sundance.
Just like, you know, start hammering people with poles. I'm sure the police will be fine with it. You know.
Fuck the police. We govern ourselves, all right? On that point,
I don't know. That's a tough one, to be honest. It's like that's trying to solve some society's biggest problems.
No, of course, but we.
So we've got like how long left to figure that out? No.
Well, I think we can always discuss it. I think one thing that I think is probably true, and there's a really interesting bit that I'm trying to find, and I'd be interested to hear your opinion on this. Like, do you think there is a crisis of identity at the moment?
Currently in society.
Yeah, currently amongst people that you know, we know. I guess it's being a young man, I can relate most to young men, and I would personally think amongst young men there is some degree of lack of identity. At least I personally feel this. I think. So.
No, I think it is an issue. But then, I mean, the issue is that nowadays people are like people are trying to find their identity in something, you know, whether it's their work or their hobbies or whatever. They're trying to find that in that. And if you said to them, like, you know what you're missing a tribe, they would probably laugh at you. And they'd probably say that's not, like, I think they would be confused as how a tribe can actually form their whole identity. Or a large part of it. Do you get what I mean?
No, for sure. No, I mean, yeah.
Like, they're like,
Agree.
It's almost, I don't know, maybe it's an arrogance thing. It's like I am so much more than, like, I'm a modern person. I live in a modern society. I do 25 different things a week. Like, I am so much more than just a tribe, you know? That's not my identity.
Yeah. Well, I guess my response to that would be, if we were doing it in a modern day setting, you wouldn't go live in the woods and pitch tents and try and catch squirrels. You know what I mean? Like, you would still live.
I'm just imagining trying to catch a squirrel.
It'd be hard.
Those things are pesky.
You would die so quickly.
They probably don't have much meat on them either, so.
That's why I guess that our response would be to start farming squirrels. Well, I think it will be somehow incorporated into modern life. Somehow or another. I mean, this is why I want to talk about it and kind of explore it, because if there is a crisis of identity, let me just quote the book here real quick. So there are two bits. Ooh, yeah. So this actually a two-part thing. So one point of this is, so it's this. The exact thing is, what would you risk dying for, and for whom?
Is that page? I think I highlighted that as well.
Page 59.
Yeah. See.
Yeah, but in a way, it's true. It's like if you live in a tribe, and you know these are your people. These are your people. You know, this is what like I owe so much to them, and they owe so much to me. Whatever. What would you die for? And whom? But the second part of that is on the next page, and it goes, for tens of millennia, this has been one of the ways that we have identified ourselves as people, which I found very interesting, because it's like, that's partially where your identity is from.
Well,
Right.
yeah, as
Yeah.
in, yeah. It says we have defined ourselves, but the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's what I think identity is how you see yourself and who you are, who you feel you are. However, if you're kind of like a very like purposeless person, like you don't really have much important things in your life, then life becomes quite meaningless. It's like, okay, well, go work. Oh yeah, I'll go to the gym. Oh yeah, I'll go have drinks with my mates, and which are all nice things, but like, are you willing to die for that? And like, that is almost a critical thing that I think that many young men need to define themselves by. This passionate, almost aggressive kind of expression of something, or belief in something, which I think is something that I lack. And I think a lot of people lack, and I feel quite sad about that.
Yeah. No, it's yeah, that is an interesting point. I did remember thinking about that, and because he says it's perhaps the most profound question a person can ask themselves, and it is truly. The thing just about the male aggression that I found funny was the anecdote about how he was in a bar and it was like some Spanish guys and some Moroccan guys, and like he says a line and it's like, male aggression is like, there's a very fine line between like conflict and, is it comfort?
Unity.
Or unity? Yeah,
unity. Basically, I think the point was men express themselves quite aggressively, and often if we do this kind of thing together, we end up becoming quite bonded as a result. It's just a phenomena. So,
but it's almost like he says like, there's this line and it's like, you know, a few different words, a few like, you know, a few differences in the scenario, and all of a sudden, instead of being unified by what makes you similar, and just, you know, you end up actually in conflict.
Yeah.
But the same base emotion and the same base.
Exactly.
You know,
It's so interesting.
I just found that so. It was because like it's one of those things that you're like, you can like recall and be like, yeah, like.
Yeah.
You know.
Like, have you ever had a bit of beef in school?
Yeah. I'd
Yeah.
say.
Like, I've had it, I think maybe one or two times that kind of stands out, where you have a kind of bit of beef and you're kind of posturing up to the other guy. He's in your year, so you're fairly equal. And then at the end of it, nothing actually happens. But after this posturing up thing and this kind of semi like dislike you had for each other, after doing that, I'm like, this is my boy. I swear, it's like, then we had so much respect for each other. Then we would see each other outside school and be like, yes, you know, I like, okay, but I found this line. It goes, so firstly, the encounter was basically, he was in Spain and these these two Spanish dudes were wearing,
one of them was wearing like a
like a Viking toy helmet, and then three Italian dudes were
Moroccan.
Moroccan, I'm just getting all this wrong. It doesn't fucking matter, okay? Three dudes walk into the bar, and they scream, "Oh, that's my hat!" And then, well, after a while, they're all holding the fucking hat, screaming at each other. Then one guy goes, "Well, wait a sec, guys," but whatever. And afterwards, after an hour, they were like,
he goes,
best mates.
he goes and he like he says, hold, like he says to Sebastian, he's like, hold on to this piece, like, you know, like as if your life depends on it.
Yeah.
And he just met these people, so he was like, do I do it or do I? And he's just like, yep, I'm just gonna go for it, whatever. The guy goes to the bar and apparently grabs a bottle of wine, and then he pours it into the helmet, and then he says, every one of you drink from this. So like, drink, pass it around, drink, pass it around, and then everyone does that. And then by like the second go round, the helmet's empty. Now the bottle's empty. Now they're just passing around the bottle, and now they're all, after a few more of that, they're in a row, standing together, sort of arms on each other's shoulders, singing in Spanish and French. And they can't even communicate with each other, but
And the line is, I found it. So he goes, "What I like about the encounter was that it showed how very close the energy of male conflict and male closeness can be. It's almost as if they are two facets of the same quality. Just change a few details, and instead of heading towards collision, the men head toward unity."
It's a nice one.
Which I think is really interesting. I think for my entire life, I've always been quite aggressive in a kind of like play fighting or climbing or like martial arts or like breakdance. I've always been quite rough. I like to kind of like tumble about and do these kind of things. It was always purely friendly, and I often find it quite strange when people don't get that. Or not strange, I feel kind of disappointed, because I personally relate to that on such a deep level. That's one of my main ways of expression. That's why I do all these things like breakdance, which is damn aggressive and hard. And then there's also when you battle, it's like you're almost fighting each other. Then jiu-jitsu is just beating the shit out of each other. But like so I think I relate to that quite a lot. And like I kind of wish more people had that, especially maybe in my office. I don't know.
Just fighting around in the office.
Have a little fight in the kitchen. Like, But I think it's interesting. Like, would you agree on some level? Like, Can you agree to that? So, do you think it's almost quite normal for men or young or men or women, whoever, but to have this kind of like way of being?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's also a culture thing. I think maybe in, like just think of a greeting, formal or informal, between two British people, and then think of that same. It doesn't matter, male, female, and then think of that between two. And I'm just going to say Italians.
Yeah, they're the best. Though.
It's and even in Arab culture, it's like European and Arab culture. It's a completely different way of greeting each other. It's more like a embrace, whereas British introduction is just a formal handshake.
Hi. Oh,
yeah.
Hi.
So
Hi.
like, and we've got I work with some Italians, and they're very like. They don't. It's not enough to just chat to you. They want to they're like, oh hey, like how's it going? They want to initiate contact. They'll like speak. They'll be quite close when they're speaking to you, and it's cool. Like I've got nothing. Like some people are very like, oh, like don't get in my personal space.
Yeah.
But like, it's nice to experience that.
Yeah,
that
no,
difference.
I totally agree. There's like a physicality about it. Yeah, so I think that's something that British culture doesn't do very well, or I mean, I guess it's a different style of being, but it's interesting. It's very interesting.
Well, I think there was that study a while ago that it's like hugging somebody that you trust can reduce stress, but then hugging somebody you don't trust can induce like fear and anxiety.
Okay.
So, but then maybe that study was just done here. Like if it was done in Italy, maybe it was like, they don't care who they hug. It's just a stress relief for them.
Yeah, like
it's, or maybe it's like it helps them to feel kind of closer to that person, or like they get a better introduction. Like a very formal handshake intro isn't exactly setting you up for a friendship, is it?
Yeah.
It's just a hey, meet.
Yeah. Like I remember back when I was 16. So 15, 16, 17, I had a really tight group of mates, really, really tight, and we were bonded in many ways. Partially because we were taking lots of drugs and that kind of stuff, which really does bond you together. But one interesting thing, and one thing I really loved about our culture then, is that it doesn't matter which person in the group, male, female, whenever we saw each other, we gave each other a hug. So we would I would walk into my mate's house and like 6 of them would be there. I'd give every single one a hug. It was such a nice thing. It was such like a, how's it going? You know, you properly embrace. And like being in Italy and stuff and seeing the way, or even Spain, like when men and women meet, they give each other 2 kisses.
Yeah.
Or even Italy, like the men do it as well. I think, is that right? Yeah, it's right. I'm always right.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
No, the other thing I found interesting, and I guess it's loosely tied to this whole aggression thing, is the whole like the fact that we're never in modern society, like we don't get given this chance to like, you know, prove ourselves in we kind of said earlier in that high.
Totally.
Like I don't know. Maybe maybe a reason why superhero films are so big now, because we like.
There's a lot of argument for that actually.
Because we're like, you know, we want that action in our lives. We want that feeling of like, you know, being put in a high stress situation, relating to those characters and be like, we can get out of that. We can, you know.
Yeah, and it's like doing well and doing that task relatively well and coming back to your people and getting sort of recognition for what you've done for your people or something like that. Like, I think for me, just come to think about it, I quite dig all these kind of small sort of challenges. Like public speaking, I really quite like it. Like even if I'm quite nervous before, I feel I do it, and when I do it in quite a bold way and quite a in-your-face kind of strong way. And I feel that kind of just gives me a bit of satisfaction. It's almost as if I'm facing some challenge and I'm a very social kind of thing.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, but as in, I don't know, it's like, I mean, I don't know how much we would like it if it happened, but I always find myself like, and it probably isn't a good thing, but always wishing for like more action in my life, you know? No, not in that way. As in like being like, you know, being put in a situation where you have like, you know, you're trying to save somebody, or you're like trying, you know, it just, I don't know, maybe modern life just feels mundane.
It's too easy.
Like,
I mean,
I think that's why we love to immerse ourselves in these films and these TV shows where the characters go through these crazy scenarios. Yeah. Because it's like we wish some sense of the, you know, unordinary would appear in our lives.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No. I totally agree. There is such a lack of kind of initiation in our society. I feel like there's no risk. Everything is so safe. Which I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Obviously, it's probably the better situation in many ways. But there's no danger. There's no excitement, as you say.
I mean, he talks quite a bit about the Blitz.
He does.
In London.
Really, really interesting. So interesting.
And this is like a shout out to Londoners, to be honest. It's like, he says this, he's throughout the Blitz, as it was known, many Londoners trudged to work in the morning, trudged across town to shelters or tube stations in the evening, and then trudged back to work again when it got light. Like that's like hardcore. The London, like, you know, like Londoners in a crisis. And what do we, like, you know, everyone's just trudging to work and trudging back and nothing happens. I'm not saying I want like bombs being dropped down.
Yeah.
But it's just like, we don't have any kind of, like we're in normal situations every day. That's it.
Yeah. It's very interesting how he says in disaster situations and war situations, depression, suicides, admissions to psychiatric wards all decrease. Crime decreases in disasters.
I was thinking about this, and this is, I think maybe I started off in the book. I don't know why, but I just kind of had maybe like a more critical thinking hat on. But yeah, so I put I put a little comment, and is that to do with maybe the effect of war on people's perspective? You know, so it's like, oh yeah, maybe I'm a little bit depressed, but you know, people are dying, like people are getting bombed, people are like, you know, being tortured, whatever, like, you know, and what is my little, and I'm not trying to diminish what it is, whether it's mental or psychological, that is nothing compared to what's happening. Or maybe what he's saying is actually these mental conditions are actually when we're all being bundled into these, you know, tube stations or shelters, and you're together, and you know, you're bonding, and you're like, you know, less than a foot away from, you're sleeping next to people on either side of you. You can chat with them, you can talk through your, you know, and you feel that sense of community.
Yeah.
There's a saying that he says, I think it's like community of sufferers, brotherhood of pain. Yeah.
Let me turn the light on.
I quite like that. I quite like both of them.
But I think a key point to understand is that he argues for our entire evolution, our entire history, essentially, has been like that. Or for the vast majority of our evolution, we've been in that kind of a situation. So, to jump out of that and to live in a very different system, our brains aren't wired for that. That could be one of the reasons why people feel discontent and purposeless, and they feel nihilistic.
What lessons do you think, because they kind of often he'll bring up, say, a developing country, and then he'll compare it, not like, so he's done the tribal and then he's kind of done the modern, and then occasionally he'll bring up a developing, like what lessons do you think they can learn from Western society? Because it's almost like we always have Western society and developed countries on this, like, you know, pedestal, and like I feel like a lot of developing countries, they want to get to that. They're like, that's the goal. But I feel like in developing countries there is that much higher sense of community.
Yeah.
In like still ingrained into it. So, you know, maybe there is what are the challenges for them in terms of not basically trying to achieve exactly what modern society has and thinking that's going to solve all their problems, because it's clearly not going to.
Surely it relates to the perception that wealth and riches. No, I think it exists on a few levels. I think one is that wealth and economic strength gives you more diplomatic strength. So I think on one level, politicians are aspiring for that, because you have more political sway. I think that's one thing. I think another thing is basically the same thing. People see what people have in the West or in a first world country or developed country, and they say, oh, they've got nicer clothes, nicer cars. So it's an aspiration for material things. Perhaps it's interesting that people who say live in tribes, for example, or people who live in poorer situations, they see that all their problems would be solved if they had, you know, a nice house with good running water, and blah 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 blah. Whereas they maybe didn't realize that they potentially get more satisfaction out of life by living in tougher situations. Maybe something along those lines.
But then I think
not saying which is better or anything, but
yeah,
that might be one mentality behind it.
I mean, the other thing for me is that I feel like in developing countries, they aspire for independence, which is like the very thing which, you know, this book argues is the actual downfall of Western society, isn't it?
No, I wouldn't say independence is.
Independence, like, you know, I'd say people are like, oh, like, you know, I want to live on my own. I don't want to live, like, I don't want to have to live, you know, in like, that's what I feel like. Maybe I don't understand it, but they'll be like, oh, I don't want to live at home with 10 of my family anymore. I want to live in a nice flat in X.
My own room, at least, in my house.
I want my own income. I want all this, and that, like you said, there are parts of that which are good, like having your own income. I don't know. I can't see people wanting forever to live like in these big dorm-esque rooms. But yeah, is independence a bad thing to aspire to? Is my question.
I wouldn't say so. I would say if you understand what you're doing, like, for example, you might have a really tight community. Say we've created some sort of modern day tribe.
Yeah.
We have all these elements. However, the individuals can decide, oh, I understand the general principles of what I need to do to function the tribe. But for me personally, I want my own room. Whereas others are like, you know what, sharing is actually better for me. So I think like it's already more complex than just say don't aspire for independence. You know what I mean? It's understanding the principles behind it, and then tailoring a system that works for you. Whereas, and I think it just makes total sense in your life, say if you're living in somewhere quite poor, to aspire for more, to aspire for better. That just makes sense, just to move up in the world. Everybody has their struggles, and I guess many people would or feel that by attaining more resources, they are improving their situation, which in many cases probably is true. But I guess we kind of, in one of the most developed cities in the world, we can kind of say, oh, but wait a sec, there's actually more complex than that, there's different things happening.
I mean, to be honest, we like, and maybe that's just human nature. We are all, and if you're not, I'm not going to say there's something wrong with you, but maybe you've actually figured out the truth to happiness. But all of us are aspiring, right? Like, whether we're aspiring writers, podcasters, actors, everybody is aspiring for something, right? So it's not just a thing in developing countries. It's also like,
yes, but then that changes subject of the independence thing.
Yeah.
I mean,
but as in, I feel like, to be honest, to a certain extent, I'm aspiring for more financial independence as well, right?
I think you're actually a really interesting point to discuss, Mo. Because you do, from what it seems, have a really tight family situation. Okay.
Yeah, just...
Okay, cool. But anyway, I mean... But I'm still really curious as to what elements we can introduce into modern lives.
Yeah.
Into our modern lives that could, that can be adopted in a realistic way. Or like, we maybe even undertake some projects or like some mini studies.
I mean, maybe
to
like...
understand how we can bring this to modern day life.
I think if we did like a study as to the living people, like, okay, if you gave people an option for the living conditions they could choose, and like, I feel there would be a correlation between their social and economic standing and what they want. So for example, I think if we asked people, like if you asked people who are like homeless, you were like, would you be willing to live in a dorm with, other homeless or other people who are struggling, or just with anybody? They'd probably say, yeah, I'd be up for that, because they had been living on the streets. They might not necessarily get much human interaction.
Okay.
And then I feel like as you go up and then you start asking people like, would you be willing to stay in like a...
Not the point at all. I mean, that's like saying, oh, in the current system, do you want more money? And you go, oh, yeah, sure, I'll have more money. Go for it. Do you want a nice car? Oh yeah, sure. Why
No,
not?
but what I mean
like,
is, if you opened it up, like if I asked you, would you live in a dorm? You probably say no.
Well, no. Well, I mean, that's not the route forward. Like, what you would need to do is to kind of levels of, you need to do some sort of education or some sort of actual testing. Actual, like, it's not about asking people in the street whether they want to live in a dorm or not. You know what I mean? Because that hasn't done anything. That is more like the kind of end test that you do after the experiment. But you need to do the experiment first, and then at the end go, okay, well now let me ask you some things about life, you know, and how you want to live your life. But you need that first bit first. Otherwise, there's no test. It's like we're going to do a control experiment and a control experiment. You know, it's like nothing has changed.
Yeah. So what would your like? But what would the experiment be?
I have no idea. That's what I want to think about. Like, actually, me and Kevin have been talking about this for some time now, prior to reading this book. And I think one really interesting thing that we kind of talked about is, and this might get a bit sensitive, but like, a lot of people would join, say, Christianity later on in life. Not like once they become an adult. Is because they're kind of desperate and they need some support for some terrible situation in their life. Absolutely fine. I've nothing against that, right? But I think one of the reasons why they stay is because they have this community of people around them of mutual support.
Support system, yeah.
Yeah, it's a support system. It's a very non-judgmental, communal, sharing support system. You also have a very clear focus of what you're doing, which I think, in a very general sense, is I'm here to make myself better in some way or other. And that could be done through, you know, listening to scripture or reading scripture or listening to lessons or whatever it may be. I find a lot of the stuff that Christians talk about, for example, okay, I'm not in this world, but this is my understanding. A lot of it is just about morals, about how to be a good person, about how to do all these kind of things, which I think is great, you know. But I think one of the reasons why people stay there is, one, is a real tight community of people, of understanding, of mutual willingness together. Second is, you're actually striving to make yourself a better person. So I think these are two kind of big features that are needed for some sort of a community. But then I think me and Kevin actually went a bit further and talked about a few other things. One, I think is quite important, and I could be proven wrong, is struggle. Not only are we a community of support, we struggle together. We do something together, you know? It could be anything. It could be like, we're here to make amazing music. We're going to do whatever we can to get out some really interesting sounds, you know? Or it's dance, or it's jiu-jitsu, you know? We're going to beat each other up because it's fun and because we're learning to better ourselves. Some sort of struggle. Whatever it is. And whether that struggle is kind of has some degree of risk in terms of health or whatever, I don't know, but struggle nonetheless. And what else was it? I think enjoyment was another thing. Has to be fun on some, I think. But anyway, these three things are things that I think are quite key to a community. So I was thinking of Kevin and with Connor as well, as to how will we set something like this up and bring like-minded individuals in to try and form something like this, to try and get some benefits out of the tribal system. And this is something I have not yet made much progress on, but I'm thinking about it.
I mean, what? It could be like a...
Your face earlier was bad funny.
It could be like I don't know. I mean, not like a, yeah, like a. I feel like the people need to be living in proximity to each other. Like, I don't know. Maybe you could build like a big, like resi building or something. and then
No,
and then
I agree with that.
you house those people in there, and then they're like, you have, say, weekly community meetings where you just chat about, whatever you want.
I mean, there are like co-living spaces now, and there are like, I've seen a few adverts for like, this like a young professionals place where you can come and live in this building and it's cool. But then there's other things, like my mum was exploring this a while ago. It was like a co-living space. So it's like there's a big piece of land almost, and then there are houses all around it, around the side of it, and all their gardens kind of link onto this back cool. bit. And then you kind of co-live with these people. So there are these kind of ventures happening. And I think I do agree with you. Living in proximity is quite important because you kind of want to see your squad on a daily basis.
Yeah, like if it was like in your area, even then it'd be a struggle sometimes. Like coming back late from work or this or that. Whereas if it's like you live in the same place, you might bump into each other by the stairs or the lift or in the kitchen. Yeah. If it's a communal kitchen or in the living room if you have one. So.
Yeah, no. And I was thinking about something you said earlier. Starter free, Paul. It's the dream.
Anyway, Starter what?
Starter free, Paul. You asking like, would you want to live in your own room? Have you like stayed in a hostel?
Yeah.
And you're sharing a room with a bunch of people?
Yeah.
I really like that. I really dig that. And maybe it's just maybe I had a few good hostels with some interesting people and some good vibes. But there is something I do quite like about that kind of sleeping in the same kind of space.
I mean, I think there's two parts to it. I've had, like, when it's a hostel with like mates, or even just like, staying in like an Airbnb where you're all kind of living in a sort of smallish space. That's quite cool as well, and that's because you're with your mates and it's helping you get closer because you're staying together. Then there's the like staying on your own with other people that are also on their own and meeting people, and that's cool as well. The issue I have is that I don't know, I quite like and it sounds cliched, but it's like I quite like my own space, and I wouldn't mind living in a shared room if there was this somehow like a distinction. Like there's like you have like if you look at Unite,
it's like student halls.
Yeah. So they do graduate ones mostly, I think.
Okay. And
it's interesting that their grad ones, like instead of doing like double rooms, they'll have flats.
Okay.
So it's like 4-person or a 6-person flat. You each get your own room, but you share the kitchen and the living space. And I think that's more for me. That's more something I would want than but that's just like living in a flat. It's than living in dorms. I think dorms for like holidays and stuff is cool though.
Yeah. As in, I'm not saying it's the better solution, but I guess what I wanted to express was like I did feel a kind of it felt kind of good in a way. It just felt. I guess in my experience they were always positive. Yeah. I guess, but I don't know. Just a random meandering thought. What else in this book? There's actually a lot of gems in this book.
The Man and the Dogs.
Yeah. Yeah, this is quite interesting. So, British historians have linked the hardships of the Blitz and the social unity that followed to a landslide vote that brought the Labour Party into power in 1954 and eventually gave the United Kingdom national healthcare and a strong welfare state. So it's kind of through struggle you get unity, which I thought is quite an interesting thing.
Yeah, I mean, maybe without those events we wouldn't have the NHS. We
might have a more American system where you have to pay for everything. So we should bomb America and then Everything will be better.
Did not say things like that. Yeah, I mean, this was something that, yeah, another theory, and it was about the self-determination theory. This was kind of, so it says, it holds that human beings need three basic things in order to be content. They need to feel competent at what they do, they need to feel authentic in their lives, and they need to feel connected to others. And so it's saying that these, I found this really interesting as well, the internal versus the external. These values are considered intrinsic to human happiness and far outweigh extrinsic values such as beauty, money, and status. But what modern society does is emphasizes the extrinsic values.
Yeah. I might highlight that too.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting point. And it makes very much sense. It's like we've become very good, we being the modern Western world, we've become very good at dominating our environment and dominating the systems external to us, right? We build the best buildings, we build the best tech, we build the best bombs, all this kind of stuff. We've just got dominance of that. And we're the most wealthy, we have the most stuff, we're the most, and we have fruit from Japan and all these kind of things. But it's also hugely interesting the amount of people in America that are on prescription drugs, antidepressants, and the amount of school shootings, mass shootings in America.
Yeah.
So I think it's arguably a fair comment to say that we're very good at the external stuff but really bad at the internal stuff. And I think I would agree with that point.
Yeah. It's an interesting one. But then the other thing as well is what I found interesting was how, like people who, it talks about how there are, positives and negatives from war, in the sense that from a personal experience, like you go through you have a really tight unit, you bond, and then obviously there are the negative in terms of the traumatic things. But then often you'll get lots of people who speak about war very positively, right? Like one of the people he speaks about from Bosnia, and they're saying like how they preferred, like, we were happiest in the war.
Yeah.
Happiest, not happier, happiest.
Like, I think,
and we laughed more.
That I thought was a very inspirational, happy story. I think it is arguably like an isolated story. It's not particularly reliable, but I did think it was very interesting.
But it's also the fact that we don't always learn from war.
Yeah.
Like in the period of high stress and suffering, we come together, we support each other, and we help each other, and occasionally it results in things like the NHS where we learn from what's happened. But then over time, it's that kind of whole theory of people like me and you who haven't experienced war. We start to then disassociate ourselves with all of the results of war, and we start to act as individuals again. And then that leads us to war again, and then we're part of that community of sufferers, and then we try and fix things, and then after that our children or the next generation forget about war, and it continues like that as like a cycle, right? But from what this journalist said, Bosnia didn't learn from it afterwards. Like they went back to trying to, or like the society was fractured.
So I mean,
after that,
talk about how it was all good. Talk about how the war. Talk about how the girl in the story really enjoyed the part of it.
Shall I talk about it?
Yeah, I mean, mention it. Mention how it was good and why it was good.
So she went. She was there in the war, and then she got hit by some shrapnel, and she had to go. Basically, her family were like, "You have to really go. You're losing weight, blah blah." we need to get you out of the country. She went to Italy. She was there on her own.
Okay, well yeah. So and then long story short, she went back. But the point is like, why did she go back? Like, what
Because she
experience?
felt so lonely and isolated, and she didn't have anyone. She felt like she had no one to share any experiences with.
I think one thing that she talked about that was really cool. So she was a teenager at the time, and she said all of the buildings in the area, even if they were semi-damaged or whatever, all the buildings would group together. All the families in those buildings would become a unit. And she talked about how in the basement, a lot of the teenagers had kind of a little semi-home down there. All the teenagers would gather there, and they would bond together, and they would go through the war, and they would kind of fall in love with each other, and they would just be a unit all together in this terrible situation down in that basement. And she said it was one of the best times of her life.
Yeah.
She said real unity, real tightness, really close. She said there was so much laughter. Wait.
Yeah.
Let me find that
She
quote.
said we were happiest then.
Yeah. She
And
said
we laughed the most.
Yeah.
She said.
Which is kind of, yeah, we were the happiest. How do you say that name? Ahmetasevich. Ahmetasevich said. Then she said, and we laughed more. And then her parents sent her away to Italy, but then after 2 years she went back. She went back to the war zone because she felt more at home there. And I think that's a very nice, pretty story, but we can't really rely on that one story for anything.
Yeah,
I
of
think.
course. What did you think about the two different types of courage? I thought
was
that was
that?
really interesting.
What was that?
It was like between it was talking about how, so humans are kind of wired to help one another, but that essentially men and women show courage in different ways.
Yeah.
So you've got moral courage, which is
Yeah.
like women who, like, they will see something that doesn't necessarily need them to act heroically, but it's like, they have to, on a moral kind of basis, they have to show courage to stop what they think isn't correct.
I found the wording in that section very, very sketchy because one second. Let me find it, alright? Let me find it.
But this was also the kind of thing that we were talking about earlier, in the sense that we no longer, I guess, a lot of the time, modern day men aren't put in a situation like that. So he says,
What page is this?
56. So I found this really interesting. Men perform the vast majority of bystander rescues.
Yeah.
And children, the elderly, and women are the most common recipients of them. Children are helped regardless of gender, as are the elderly, but women of reproductive age are twice as likely to be helped by a stranger than men are. Men have to wait, on average, until age 75 before they can expect the same kind of assistance in a life-threatening situation that women get their whole lives. I don't know.
That's very funny.
Yeah. So it says, given the disproportionately high value of female reproduction to any society risking male lives to save female lives makes enormous evolutionary sense, which is like, okay. So 90% of spontaneous rescues of strangers, they were around 1 in 5 were killed in the attempt.
Yeah.
No, so male bystanders performed 90%.
Yeah.
Of those rescues.
And then in contrast, we talk about the moral courage thing, which is supposedly women are a bit better at. But then if you look at the wording, it goes, I'm not knocking women or anything, but there's just the wording. It goes, blah, 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 blah. Women slightly outnumber men in the list of people who risk their lives to help Jews. Which is like, I think he's maybe trying to come up with some interesting male-female difference, but he goes, yeah, men do 90% of this and then women do slightly more of the other one. Which doesn't support his point.
Yeah, well, as in it would have been difficult, or it would have been a bit almost too nice if it was like 90% of women do that as well. You know, there was another one. It was about it was like if you.
One?
Oh no, sorry. I was looking at found that if married couples are excluded. Yeah, so.
So I thought, okay, that's an interesting point. This whole like different types of courage and how like men do something very well and women do the other thing very well. But I just don't think we could delve into the research and have a look at what's happening. But he was like, yeah, slightly outnumbered the men. I was like, okay, cool. But it is very interesting how, and I think that's one interesting thing about men as well. It's like we kind of are more wired to do stupid things,
like, you know, run into a burning building to save somebody. You
exactly,
know?
yeah. Which I think relate to in some sense.
But do you see what I mean? Do you see what I mean by how we're not put in those situations?
Yeah,
and that's what he argues is that, you know, we can go our whole lives basically without being forced to demonstrate our commitment to what he calls the collective good. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
That's where our identity is.
I think so. I do think so. I think that probably a big part of our identity would come from things like that, to feel part of the community and to be putting our lives on the line, because I think we probably have evolved to do that kind of thing, to hunt and, you know, do dumb stuff. But I think one thing that's almost quite bad is that I think if you have this kind of behavior traits, if you have these kind of behaviors in a situation where it's not needed, so say you're quite aggressive or you're quite like loud and boisterous, you're almost like put down for those things. You know, like certain people would be like, oh, just calm down, just stop being such an animal or whatever, you know what I mean? And like you're almost like put down as a result of that. It's like, chill, calm down.
But you're saying you're actually like more people should be like this, you're saying. Or not necessarily more people should, but you're merely, you know, showing signs of our evolution.
Yeah, and I think...
And you're being knocked for it when you should be like thriving for it. You should be like, ooh.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just like, ooh. But then
then everyone's just like, that pool guy is a bit intense.
Why is he such a dickhead?
That pool guy like punched me 3 times. I'm just trying to get coffee.
What's up, bro? What's up, dude?
So stop it, man.
But
yeah.
Well, I think I would just like more awareness about all of these things, I guess. And then, like, I also feel that if somebody feels the need to behave in that kind of way, that they are free to, you know, and they won't be chastised, they won't be, you know, put down as a result for just being normal, for just being who they are. Which I think probably does happen on some degree, which is also very interesting. It's like, we've come so far away that the way we define the way people should be is almost very wrong. Which I think is very true. There are so many like written or unwritten rules saying what you can and can't do that are almost very meaningless. Like there's one I find really interesting. I was listening to a podcast like yesterday, and they were saying if you go and walk outside naked, so all you do is you take your clothes off and just be your complete normal self, you can get arrested and put in prison. Which is insane. It's like you've just taken your clothes off and that's it. Then you can get put in prison. It's like how distant we are from our base nature. Or like we've made these rules. That's really offensive. That's this, you know, that's intimidating to people or whatever. It's like, man, it's just the human body. And then, we have such a taboo around it. Such a thing against that it's law. I find that really crazy. All I want to do is run around naked. You see me? They won't let me go down.
Yeah. I think there were a couple of points near the end which I.
There's loads more of that. There's actually tons more that we could talk about. Loads more, mate. The fundamental lack of connectedness allows people to act in trivial but incredibly selfish ways. Rachel Yehuda pointed to littering as the perfect example of an everyday symbol of disunity in society.
Yeah.
It's a horrible thing to see because it sort of encapsulates this idea that you're in it alone, that there isn't a shared ethos of trying to protect something shared, she told me. It's the embodiment of every man for himself. It's the opposite of the military.
I highlighted that one and I found it really interesting because it is like, I think some people just think it's a minor thing. It's just like, oh, I'm just going to chuck it.
Yeah.
You know? But it's, you know, it's exactly what she said. It's our disconnectedness from, and this kind of, if we were to draw a parallel or draw a link to ego is the enemy, they talk about understanding the immensity, isn't it? That was one of the like
meditate on the
immensity. Like is that also a problem? We're disconnected from the earth, you know, because you litter and you don't realize that this is ours. It's not about, oh, it's, you know, just chucking some litter, like it doesn't matter, like nobody's gonna care, like some cleaner's gonna come and pick it up. It's like, you know, that could get swept up. It could go into a water course. It could, you know, an animal might eat into it, or it might just stay there, and you know. So we're disconnected not just from each other, but from the planet as well.
For sure.
And the other one was the and it dawned on me as well. I mean, he made a point on the, you know, people who were who had the stickers on their cars about the Iraq War, like, we do not support the Iraq War and oil.
That's so funny.
I was just like, damn, dude, like.
But then again, I don't think that's a fair comparison at all. As in, I think his point was a moot point there.
What do you mean?
Because he was saying it's ironic that they've got this sticker saying we don't want to be in the Iraq War when they're driving a car that runs on oil. It's like, well, I mean, driving a car is fine, but just pay for your oil. Go and buy your oil from the country that has it, or wherever it's from.
Yeah, but
linking the war to that is almost dumb.
Well,
because he was saying that those drivers are being ironic and dumb because, you know.
No, I don't think he was saying they're being dumb. I think he was saying they didn't understand the irony, and it is a big irony because it's like. It's not
at all.
Like, what he's saying is, like, oil, no matter where it's from, whether it's a war-torn country or not, is that there is a certain amount of, let's say, suffering or negative utility from that oil in terms of on the earth, on the people in the area.
I mean, okay, overuse of oil is obviously bad, but say we would do it relatively sustainably and responsibly, there's nothing wrong with oil. But going and invading a country for the oil, that is fucked up and wrong.
Yeah.
Because you could have very healthy production, fair wages, all these kind of things around the oil, and you pay the right price. Then there's nothing wrong with driving a car.
No. As in, I wanna make it clear that I feel like those people were doing a good thing, whether or not it was effective. You know, 1 million people marched in the UK to stop Tony Blair's support of that war as well. Like, let's make that clear. Like, there's a line there. But then further on from that, he was saying there is a little bit of irony in it. You know, and there is a bit. There is a bit. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean,
and I found it interesting because it was like, for me, it was almost like, what do we do? We all drive cars that function on oil, you know? And yeah, it was kind of like, yeah, that is, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think he kind of, I see what you're saying, but I did think that point was kind of a bit hollow because it was like, well, I mean, you can get oil from good sources. I think that the main reason why they went to war is because it'd be so expensive, you know. This way it's cheaper. If that's the case. I don't know what the war was about. I don't know. It's too complicated. All I do is run a podcast. I don't know about politics or wars or any of this craziness. Alright, man.
Oh, what do we think about technology?
In general?
Just an open just an open question. No, he speaks about it in Bitter Safety I awake. And so it's talking about a soldier or somebody coming back from the close-knit group that humans evolved for back into society, right? And he's talking about if he or she is part of a family that is not the same as belonging to a group that shares resources and experiences almost everything collectively. And the huge technological advances of modern society, no matter how miraculous they are, they've basically individualized the lifestyles that we lead. This is the line, is that those technologies seem to be deeply brutalizing to the human spirit. So that's the kind of, is technology connecting us more? Is it causing more disconnection? I mean, it's almost like, maybe we're better in touch with people across the world, but then if we're so engaged in our phones or our computers or our laptops, is that reducing our connection to the people around us?
I think there's obviously no yes/no answer to this, because there's so many different levels of technology, right? And I think one big thing that you might draw the conclusion to say, oh yeah, we're becoming more disconnected because of technology, is mainly because of many of the softwares that we use are very disconnecting. So for example, Instagram or Facebook or these things, they do give you like an endorphin hit. Every time you get a like, or you're scrolling and you see something, you kind of get this kind of buzz. These systems are designed to keep you attracted and keep you sucked in.
Keep you addicted.
Yeah, to keep you addicted. So I think it's not necessary. You can't really say technology as a whole is good or bad. You have to say how it's being used, right? Because tech could be very, very neutral. You could be a person who's not addicted to those particular softwares or that use of tech, but still live like a very communal, happy, connected life. You know what I mean? But then when it comes to making a phone call, or when it comes to doing some stuff, or even using those softwares, you're just smart enough and strong enough to use them sensibly and responsibly, then you can't argue that tech is bad. Tech is neutral. It's how we use it that's bad. Also, if softwares are being designed to be addictive, then that's really fucked up. That is really fucked up. It's why the fuck would you do that? I mean, obviously to increase their ad revenue, but...
Well, I mean, you answered it.
But from a humanitarian standpoint, it's just fucking crazy.
But as in, it's like that whole, we were having that chat, not in this podcast, about how, at the end of the day, money is the motive on most things.
Yeah.
Like, these companies, what do they want? They want you to use their software. They want you to generate revenue, right? Whether it's these in-app purchases, it's funny because some of the highest grossing apps are from in-app purchases, and they're like, the way they've gamified them is such that in order to either you advance at a really slow rate, but if you're freaking addicted to it, then you literally feel like the impulse and the desire to buy so that you can progress.
Yeah.
And then you're just making them tons of money.
Yeah. Totally. I think money is the same. Money is also a neutral thing. It's how you deal with money that gets wrong. It's where your priorities are. That's where things get weird. And but then again, if you're say one company in the whole system that is thinking this way, you can't really do that much. You need the entire system to be thinking along that kind of lines, along those kinds of lines. But I think, money's a really weird one. Because even if you're a company, even if there's a company who says, they believe in equality and whatever, left wing, I don't know, but it's still very possible that if a certain senior person, say, gets a big pay bump, they're making really good money, and then the company starts to do a bit not so well, then it's likely that that senior guy won't take a pay cut so that the people below can rise up a bit. Because the company hasn't grown enough for these people to come up. But what really needs to happen is the person at the top to just shed, the 5%, so that the two people down there can get a bit of a pay bump and feel really good and feel that they're progressing. So it's all really weird. And
there was that story about towards the end about the guy.
Convoluted. Yeah, the very last line.
Was it him?
Was it?
No, it was Bauman. Yeah, it was like the last few pages.
Who?
Martin H. Bauman. So he had a successful job in New York City, and it was his company. But then it started experiencing some kind of like a bit of an economic downturn, and so then he called his employees and he asked them all to accept a 10% like pay cut so that they wouldn't fire anyone, and then basically they all agreed, and him, without telling anyone, he completely gave up his salary until the company was back and like up and running and running safely. He didn't tell anyone. That's crazy.
That's a savage move. That's a real that's really honorable. It's like, but I guess it's also like, if you built this thing and if you can afford it, I mean, I think that's the whole point. If you can afford it and you can manage and you want this thing to really be a good environment, then like that's what you need to be. If you have resources, you sacrifice them for your fellow people.
Well, it's like, David Beckham, his last year of playing, was it for PSG? He all of his salary was going to charity.
Really?
And that's not that small an amount if you're on 250k a week.
Not at all, yeah.
And people have done it in the past. Like, I think there's an NFL player who plays on some ridiculously low salary. He's probably on ridiculously low, not that low, but he's probably on
He sheds at least 50% or
whatever. Maybe even more. He might be on say he's on 200k a week. He might only take 20 of that, and then the rest is all
20k a week.
Only,
It's a hard life.
Because he's just like, what do I need all of that money for?
Yeah.
So it is interesting because unfortunately that's not what society is like. These are the exemplar people that we can just be like, oh, this person did that and this person did that, and everyone else is, it's funny that we've got billionaires that are idolized, like your Bill Gates and your
Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, and literally they've accumulated so much wealth that they could never spend it all. Like Bill Gates waited until he had billions and billions and billions until he was like, probably worth setting up a trust to put all of this money into. I'm not going to spend all of this. It's like, oh, okay, really? Like, what about all your employees? I'm sure there are loads of his employees who need money.
Yeah.
Surely.
Yeah.
Microsoft can't play that well.
Especially with Apple in the mix. Yeah.
But it's just, it gets, it perplexes me. Didn't it come out the other day that 3 people in America, the top 3 richest people in America, are worth more than half of the country?
Really?
Yeah, that's 3 people worth more than the poorest 170 million.
That's like some Gini coefficient. Is it 1 or is it 0? I think it's 1. It's like 0.9 or 0.95 or some crazy shit like that. You know what this is? So
No.
The Gini coefficient is a measure of inequality. I think if you're on a full 1, it's like one person owns 99% of the wealth or something like that. Yeah, but anyway.
Wow. But yeah, I mean, that's ridiculous.
It's insane, yeah.
Especially in, I don't know what the inequality is like here, but here, at least in inequality, we still have things like the NHS which they're trying to break up. Hopefully they don't. Which help people who, are in the lower end of society. Not even the lower end, in the mid to low, anyone who can't afford private healthcare, they can just go. Whereas over there, it's like you literally have people who aren't going to hospital that need to go because they can't afford it. And you've got 3 people who own more than 50% of the population, which is just...
it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And I think the only way to do it is if we go up there, form tribes, murder all of them, then start a new system. Revolution! No, I'm just kidding.
The revolution will not be televised.
No, but seriously, okay, maybe we should start wrapping this up a little bit. But I think, what are your main thoughts, and what do you want to, what do you really take away from this, and what would you like to see? What are you thinking, basically, after this this week of reading?
There's just so much to take out of it, really.
I think this has been a very dense book, for sure. I think this has been almost quite the opposite to Ego is the Enemy.
Yeah,
Ego the Enemy was dragged out. This is very much like every other page. Like, look how many times we've folded. Every other page has like a really...
You probably haven't even gone through half of them. But
no, I haven't. I have not.
But yeah, I guess try and connect more with people. Try and get those 3 things, those intrinsic values, the competence and the authenticity, and
connected to the other people,
and connection, and try and figure out answers to questions like, what and who would you die for, and I guess maybe try and figure out how we can bring in tribal culture into a modern day society. That's probably a huge challenge.
I think, sorry.
That's about it, yeah.
I think the final point is exactly what I would like to do. I think I want to kind of take a design kind of approach at this problem. Like, how can we do this? Like, what features can we design? What things can we do to really try and start introducing a kind of tribal, a connectedness between people? Like, if the problem is, if our design brief is connectedness of people, that's almost a similar kind of problem like tackling food waste at home. I wouldn't say they're too different on scale.
Design thinking, we
could do a storm.
We could do
some sort of storm. I actually had an idea today. I'll tell you offline because.
Okay. We could do it as a design workshop or design sprint or something.
Storm
session. Whatever.
Or just have a think and try and come up with some interesting little baby steps in that direction. And maybe we come up with the answer that isn't so producty. It might be very, very, this is the kind of lifestyle that we have to be living. Maybe that's our answer. But that's the kind of thing that I would like to do. I think I was thoroughly inspired by this book, I would say. I really enjoyed it. And I think I'm, finished in 3 days. Doosh, smashed it.
Smashed it out.
Yeah. And I think, I want to live a life more connected with a tribe of people, And I've been trying to figure out for actually many years now, but I guess by reading this, I've developed more of a vocabulary and a context of understanding about how I would go about doing that.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I think it's probably time to wrap up. Have we got the book for next month?
We do. It's We Learn Nothing by, what's his name? I forget.
Tim Creeder.
Yeah.
We Learn Nothing.
Yeah.
Or was it?
Okay. We Learn Nothing.
Okay.
We Learn Nothing.
And potentially, we're hoping to do a little Black Panther film review podcast. Maybe next Monday, potentially.
I need to watch it. And I'm not I won't have time until next week.
But potentially something between next month's book review. Will be a little Black Panther chat. Talking about Black Power and that.
Yeah. You get the a very, very white London boy talking about black rights. Let's do this. All right, cool. I think that sums everything up. See you later, y'all.
Peace.